200 people froze. The crack of his hand against her face echoed through the casino like a gunshot. Grace stood there,
Mr. Whitmore,
7 months
we need to
pregnant,
discuss your activities tonight.
blood
What is
trickling
this?
from her lip,
I demand
while her
to know what's
millionaire
happening.
husband raised his hand to strike again. But Derek made one fatal mistake that night. He didn't know the pit boss watching from above wasn't just any casino employee. He was Grace's father, a decorated FBI agent who'd been investigating Derek for money laundering for 18 months. What happened next would expose secrets darker than anyone imagined. 4 years of hidden abuse, millions in dirty money, affairs with multiple women, and a pregnant wife who'd finally had enough. This is the story of how one public slap became the beginning of the end for a man who thought he was untouchable, and how a woman who'd been silenced for years found her voice, not just for herself, but for the daughter she was carrying. Value statement: this story carries a powerful truth. Leaving isn't weakness. It's the ultimate act of courage. If you've ever felt trapped, powerless, or afraid to speak up, Grace's journey will remind you that you deserve better, and escape is always possible. The casino floor went silent. 200 people froze mid-gamble as the crack of a hand against skin echoed through the room. Grace Hoffman stood there, 7 months pregnant, blood trickling from her lip, while her millionaire husband raised his hand for another strike. But Derek Whitmore made one fatal mistake that night. He didn't know the pit boss watching from above wasn't just any casino employee. He was Grace's father, a decorated FBI agent, who'd been investigating Derek for money laundering for 18 months. What happened next would expose secrets that went far deeper than anyone imagined. 4 years of hidden abuse, millions in dirty money, and a pregnant woman who'd finally had enough. This is the story of how one public slap in a crowded casino became the beginning of the end for a man who thought he was untouchable, and how a daughter he'd controlled for years found the courage to fight back, not just for herself, but for the child she was carrying. But Grace had no idea what she was about to uncover, or how many lives would be changed by her decision to finally speak the truth. This is her story, and if you've ever felt trapped, powerless, or afraid to leave, this one's for you. The crack of skin against skin cut through the casino floor like a gunshot. Every slot machine seemed to freeze mid-chime. Cards hung suspended above green felt tables. The roulette wheel stopped spinning. 200 people turned as one toward the sound. Grace Hoffman stood perfectly still, one hand flying to her cheek, the other cradling her 7-month pregnant belly. The emerald maternity dress her husband had chosen, too tight, always too tight, caught the overhead lights. Her lip was bleeding. She could taste copper and shame. "Look what you made me do," Derek Whitmore hissed, his face still twisted with rage. His voice dropped low, that dangerous quiet she knew too well. "If you had just kept your mouth shut, if you had just let me play. But no, you had to embarrass me." The baby kicked, hard, like she was trying to tell Grace something, like she knew. Grace's internal voice was surprisingly calm. The baby kicked, right before his hand connected with my face. That's what I'll remember most. Not the pain, not the shock, just her, trying to warn me, trying to tell me to run, but Grace couldn't run. Her feet were rooted to the casino floor, heels sinking into plush carpet. Around them, the frozen moment began to thaw. Whispers started. Phones came out. Someone gasped. From the pit boss platform 15 feet away, Tom Hoffman watched his daughter's face crumple, watched her hand shake as she touched the blood on her lip. Watched Derek Whitmore, his son-in-law, the man he'd been investigating for 18 months, raise his hand again. Tom moved. "Security." His voice cut through the casino with decades of Marine Corps authority. "Detain that man, now." 4 security guards appeared as if materialized from thin air. Marcus Webb, head of casino security, was already moving down from his station, radio in hand. Derek spun, seeing the pit boss for the first time. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something uglier. "Tom, what are you? You can't. I'm a platinum member here. This is a private matter between me and my wife. You just assaulted a pregnant woman." Tom descended from the platform, each step measured and deliberate. "In my casino, on camera, in front of 200 witnesses, there's nothing private about it." Grace touched her wedding ring with trembling fingers. 3 twists. Clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. The same nervous habit from her wedding day 4 years ago. Her mother had noticed it then, standing in the church vestibule. "You sure about this, baby?" Claire had asked softly. Grace had laughed it off. "Just wedding jitters, Mom." Not jitters, instinct. Warning signs her body recognized before her mind would. Derek's face flushed deeper red. She stumbled. "She's clumsy. Everyone knows pregnant women get dizzy. Tell them, Grace. Tell them it was an accident." The baby kicked again, harder this time, insistent. Grace looked at her father. Tom's jaw was locked tight, but his eyes held a question. "A choice. What do you want me to do, Gracie? I'll follow your lead. Just tell me." The words came out before Grace could stop them. Clear, final. "It wasn't an accident?" The casino erupted. Derek lunged toward her. "You stupid—" He didn't finish the sentence. Tom moved with the speed of a man 30 years younger, decades of training overriding the instinct to simply beat Derek unconscious. Derek hit the floor face first, Tom's knee in his back, arms wrenched behind him. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Tom's voice was ice wrapped in steel. "Derek Whitmore, you're under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent." "FBI?" Derek's voice cracked. "You're not FBI. You're a pit boss. You work for the casino. Grace, tell him. Tell him he's crazy." Actually, Marcus Webb appeared beside Tom. Credentials out. "Special Agent Hoffman has been working undercover here for 6 months. And you just assaulted his daughter. In front of 47 cameras. Congratulations. You're the dumbest criminal I've met all year." Grace swayed. The floor tilted. Strong hands caught her. Casino staff, EMTs already on scene. Someone pressing ice wrapped in a bar towel to her face. "Ma'am, we need to get you checked out. The baby's fine," Grace heard herself saying. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like she was speaking from underwater. "She's kicking. She's angry. She knows. Ma'am, you're in shock. Come sit down." As Derek was dragged away, still shouting, still threatening, still certain this would all blow over, because men like him always walked away, Grace let herself be guided to the casino's first aid station. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Derek being loaded into a police car. Red and blue lights painted the parking lot in alternating shame. The ice pack pressed against her face smelled like cigarettes and spilled drinks. Grace closed her eyes and saw the security footage playing on loop in her mind. Not of tonight, of every night, every moment she'd explained away. The bruised wrist she'd blamed on the car door, the thrown vase she'd claimed she'd knocked over, the hole punched in their bedroom wall that she'd told the contractor was from moving furniture. The silence she'd wrapped around herself like armor until it became a language. The language of survival. The language of fear. Tom's pit boss uniform still smelled like cigarette smoke and her childhood. Grace was 8 years old the first time her father went undercover. She'd learned early, Daddy has secrets. Daddy protects people. Daddy always knows. But Daddy hadn't known this. An EMT checked her blood pressure, frowned, checked it again. Ma'am, I'm recommending we transport you to the hospital. Your pressure is elevated. With your pregnancy, we need to be cautious. No hospital. Grace opened her eyes. I'm going to my parents' house. My mom's a nurse. She'll monitor me. Ma'am, I said no hospital. Grace stood, ice pack falling from her numb fingers. I've been going to hospitals with mysterious bruises for 4 years. Every time I lied. Every time I said I was clumsy, I fell, I bumped into things. I'm done lying in hospitals. The EMT exchanged glances with Marcus. At least let us do an ultrasound here. Make sure the baby's okay. Grace placed both hands on her belly. The baby kicked again. Strong. Alive. Fighting. She's okay. She's telling me she's okay. And she's telling me to get out. To go somewhere safe. Your father's finishing up the arrest paperwork, Marcus said gently. He'll drive you to your parents' house. Your mother's already there. She knows what happened. Of course she did. Claire Hoffman always knew. She'd known 4 years ago at the wedding. She'd known 3 years ago when Grace quit her gallery job because Derek said it was inappropriate. She'd known 2 years ago when Grace stopped coming to Sunday dinners because Derek found excuses every week. She'd known 6 months ago when they moved to the dream house 40 minutes outside town where no neighbors could hear anything. Everyone had known. No one had said a word. Grace walked through the casino on shaking legs. People stared. Phones were definitely recording now. Tomorrow she'd be viral. Tonight she was just trying to breathe. Tom met her at the employee exit. He'd stripped off the pit boss jacket. Underneath, he wore a white dress shirt and his FBI badge on a lanyard. His face was ashen. His hands shook as he reached for her. Baby girl, don't. Grace stepped back. Not yet. Just take me to Mom's. We'll talk tomorrow. Tonight, I just need to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't know how. They drove in silence. Tom gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. Grace watched the lights of the city give way to suburban streets, then to her childhood neighborhood, the house where she'd learned to ride a bike, where she'd gotten ready for prom, where she'd told her parents she was engaged to Derek Whitmore and watched her mother's smile falter for just 1 second before the congratulations began. Claire stood on the front porch, backlit by the warm glow of the living room. When Grace climbed out of the car, her mother's face crumpled. But she didn't cry. Nurses don't cry in crisis. They save tears for later, when the patient is stable. Come inside, baby, Claire said softly. Let's get you cleaned up. Let's check on that granddaughter of mine. Grace walked into her childhood home. The guest room still had her old bed, her old posters, her old life preserved like a museum. She sat on the edge of the mattress and finally let herself shake. The baby kicked. Grace whispered to her belly, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I brought you into this. But I promise we're done now. We're done being scared. Her phone buzzed. 1 text, then 5, then 20, all from Derek. The last one made her blood freeze. If you don't drop the charges, I'll make sure you never see our daughter. I'll bury you in court. You know I can. Grace turned off her phone. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and police statements and court dates. Tomorrow would bring reality crashing down. Tomorrow, she'd have to figure out how to survive as a single mother with no job, no money, and a husband who just promised to destroy her. But tonight, in her childhood bedroom, with her mother's lavender soap smell drifting through the door and her father's coffee brewing downstairs, even though it was midnight, Grace let herself feel one thing: relief. She'd survived the worst moment, the public humiliation, the exposure, the moment when silence became impossible. and she was still standing. The baby kicked again. Grace smiled through tears. "That's right, little one. We're fighters. Both of us. He didn't break us. He just made us stronger." Outside, police sirens wailed in the distance. Derek's voice probably still echoing a holding cell, still certain money would save him, still convinced this was all a misunderstanding that platinum membership could fix. But Grace knew better. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of the end. Or maybe the end of the beginning. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through her old bedroom window and her mother's voice calling softly from the hallway. "Baby, there's a detective here. Are you up for talking? I can send her away if you need more time." Grace sat up slowly. Her face ached. Her ribs ached. Her heart ached. The baby moved lazily, morning stretches against Grace's bladder. She checked her phone. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, all from blocked or unknown numbers. She turned the phone off again. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed," Grace called back. The detective was younger than Grace expected, mid-40s, sharp eyes, gentle hands. She introduced herself as Detective Linda Morrison, Domestic Violence Unit. She sat in the living room with a recorder between them and a box of tissues on the coffee table. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you some questions about last night. Take your time. If you need breaks, just say so." "It's Grace," Grace said. "Grace Hoffman. I'm filing to return to my maiden name." Detective Morrison made a note. "Grace, can you tell me what happened at the casino?" Grace recounted it. The argument because she'd suggested leaving. Derek down $40,000. His rage building, the slap, her father's intervention. "And this is the first time your husband has been physical with you?" Detective Morrison's tone was neutral, non-judgmental. But Grace heard the real question underneath. Grace opened her mouth to say yes. The lie formed on her tongue, familiar as breathing. 4 years of lies. 4 years of excuses. 4 years of protecting the man who hurt her. The lie died in her throat. "No," Grace whispered. "It's not the first time." The room went very quiet. Claire's hand found Grace's and squeezed. Detective Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell me about the other times?" Grace closed her eyes and let the memories flood in. 3 years ago. She'd been working late at the gallery, excited about a new artist they'd signed. She'd texted Derek that she'd be home by 8. He'd texted back, "Make it 7. We have plans." She'd lost track of time, arrived home at 7:45 to find him pacing the kitchen, face dark with rage. "You're embarrassing me," he'd said, voice low and dangerous. "Working for that pretentious ass, flirting with artists, making me look like I can't provide for my own wife." She'd started to explain. No flirting, just work, just passion for her career. And he'd grabbed her wrist, squeezed until she gasped, twisted until she went to her knees. "Don't you ever keep me waiting again. Do you understand?" The bruises looked like fingerprints. She'd worn long sleeves for 2 weeks, told her mother she'd grabbed a hot pan without thinking 2 years ago. Her college friend Michael had texted her a funny meme. She'd laughed. Derek had seen her laughing at her phone. "Who's making you laugh? Who's so funny that my wife is smiling at her phone instead of at me?" She'd shown him the meme, explained it was just Michael from school, just a friend. Derek had ripped the phone from her hand and thrown it across the room. It shattered against the kitchen tile. "Disrespectful," he'd spat. "Other men making my wife laugh. Texting my wife. You delete his number, you block him, or I'll make sure you can't text anyone ever again." She'd apologized, bought a new phone with her own money, never spoke to Michael again. 18 months ago, she'd mentioned having dinner with Brooke, her best friend. Derek's face had gone cold. "Your friend hates me. Every time you see her, you come home different, distant, like she's poisoning you against me." She doesn't hate you. She's my friend. I need friends. His fist went through the bedroom wall, 6 inches from her head. She'd stood frozen, plaster dust settling in her hair, while Derek shook his hand and said calmly, "You choose her over your own husband? Fine. See what that gets you." She'd called Brooke and canceled, paid for the drywall repair, never mentioned it to anyone, convinced herself it was just the wall, just property damage, not violence, not really. 6 months ago, the dream house. Derek presented it like a gift, custom built, 40 minutes outside the city, no neighbors for half a mile, floor-to-ceiling windows that made her feel exposed even while alone. A security system that sent alerts to Derek's phone every time a door opened. Privacy, he'd called it. Just us, no one else interfering, our sanctuary. Prison, Grace had started to think. A beautiful prison where no one could hear her scream. She recounted all of it to Detective Morrison, her voice flat, clinical, like she was describing someone else's life. Maybe she was. The woman in those memories felt like a stranger now. "I thought if I could just be better," Grace said, voice cracking. "If I could anticipate his moods. If I could make everything perfect. If I could just stop making mistakes, he'd stop being angry." Detective Morrison's expression didn't change, but her eyes held understanding. You can't manage another person's violence. You can only survive it. Grace described the pattern she'd memorized like choreography, his rage building over small things, dinner too cold, house too messy, Grace too tired, her fear spiking, walking on eggshells, trying to be invisible. The explosion, yelling, throwing things, sometimes grabbing, sometimes pushing. The silence afterward, heavy and suffocating. Then flowers. Then tears. Then, "I'm sorry, baby. I don't know what came over me. You know I love you. I'll never do it again." Then 2 weeks of peace. Then the cycle restarted. She'd gotten good at the dance. Too good. She knew when to apologize, even though she'd done nothing wrong. When to make herself small. When to disappear into the background of her own life. "I knew what to do," Grace whispered. "I got good at it. Too good." In the hallway outside, Tom sat with his head in his hands. Claire found him there after the detective left, wrapped her arms around her husband's shaking shoulders. "I should have seen it," Tom's voice broke. "I'm FBI. I'm trained to see patterns. And I missed it. My own daughter. I missed it." "He hid it," Claire said, her nurse's voice steady and sure. "They always hide it, Tommy. That's how they get away with it for so long. But she's safe now. We have her back. That's what matters." Inside, Grace stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, ice pack lowered. The bruise was darkening now, purple and ugly across her cheekbone. Her lip was swollen. She looked like what she was, a victim. No, a survivor. Grace said it out loud, testing the words. "I'm not crazy. The signs were all there. I just wanted the fairy tale more than the truth." Her phone buzzed. She turned it back on. Mistake. 53 new texts from Derek, routed through different numbers, each one more desperate, more angry, more threatening. "I'll get the best lawyers. You'll never see a dime. Everyone knows you're unstable. I'll prove it. That baby better be mine. I'm demanding a paternity test. If you don't drop the charges, I'll make sure you never see our daughter." Grace blocked each number. New texts came through immediately from new numbers. An endless stream of rage and control, even from jail. Then her phone actually rang. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, Grace answered. "You ungrateful little—" Diane Whitmore's voice dripped venom. "My son gives you everything. A beautiful home, financial security, and you humiliate him like this? Over a little slap? Women today are so sensitive." Grace hung up. The phone rang again. Same number. If you press charges, I'll make sure your child grows up without a father or a trust fund. Think about that, dear. Think about raising a baby alone on a gallery clerk's salary. Oh, wait. You don't even have that job anymore, do you? My son made sure you were provided for. And this is how you repay him? Grace blocked the number. Another call came through. Another unknown number, this time Derek's lawyer. The campaign had begun. Tom appeared in the doorway, jaw set. Victor Reynolds, my FBI partner, is coordinating the federal case, Derek's money laundering investigation. We've been building evidence for 18 months. We have enough to put him away for a long time, Gracie. Not just for assault, for everything. Grace looked at her father. Really looked at him. How long have you known? 6 months of solid evidence. Another year of suspicion before that. You let me stay with him while you were building your case. The betrayal tasted worse than Derek's somehow. Sharper. More unexpected. I was trying to protect you. You used me as bait. Grace's hands found her belly, protective and fierce. Both of you did. Derek used me as a trophy wife to hide his crimes. You used me as cover to investigate him. Did anyone think about what I wanted? What I needed? Claire stepped between them. Grace Elizabeth, that's not fair. Isn't it? Grace's voice rose. Dad knew Derek was a criminal. Mom, you knew something was wrong. I saw it in your face every Sunday dinner. Brooke suspected. My doctor probably wondered about those mysterious bruises, but nobody said anything. Nobody helped me. Nobody broke the glass while I drowned inside it. She described the feeling, drowning in a glass box while everyone watched, close enough to see, too far away to save her, or maybe too scared to get involved, to make a scene, to accuse a millionaire of being a monster. Everyone had seen. No one had spoken. Grace walked through the house at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. The baby's nursery, her old bedroom, still had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. She'd put them up at 10 years old, the summer her father went deep undercover for 8 months. She'd missed him so much she'd stared at those stars every night, pretending they were guiding him home. She touched them now. They still glowed. Her father had taught her. Sometimes secrets keep people safe. Sometimes silence is protection. But whose protection? Whose safety? The house smelled like her mother's lavender soap and her father's coffee. Safe smells. Childhood smells. But Grace wasn't a child anymore. She was about to become a mother. To a daughter. Who deserved better than secrets. Better than silence. Who deserved a mother brave enough to speak the truth. Grace made a decision. She'd press charges. She'd testify. She'd tell the whole world what Derek Whitmore really was behind the custom suits and country club membership. Not for revenge. For her daughter. So her daughter would grow up knowing. When someone hurts you, you don't protect them. You protect yourself. The dining room table disappeared under FBI files. Tom spread them out, methodically. Surveillance photos, bank records, shell company documents, witness statements. Grace sat across from him, hands wrapped around tea her mother made that neither of them would drink. Derek Whitmore, Tom began, his voice shifting into agent mode, is the primary target in a multi-agency investigation into real estate development fraud and money laundering. His company, Whitmore Properties, has been creating shell corporations to funnel money from offshore accounts. We estimate he's laundered over $15 million in the past 3 years. Grace stared at a surveillance photo of Derek meeting a man she didn't recognize in a parking garage. When was this taken? 4 months ago. That's Victor Reynolds. Tom caught himself on the name. Old habits. My partner. He's been helping coordinate the financial crimes unit investigation. 4 months ago, Grace repeated slowly. That was when Derek insisted we move to the new house. He said it was a surprise, a gift, our dream home. Tom pulled out another document. The house is part of it. Purchased through one of his shell companies, listed at twice its actual value, insurance fraud. Then he transferred the deed to your name, probably to protect the asset if his company got seized. Grace felt sick. I own the house? On paper, but it's entangled in his crimes. We'll sort it out. Tom hesitated, then pushed forward another photo. Gracie, I need to ask, did you ever see Derek meeting with any of these men? 5 faces, all strangers, all photographed with Derek at various locations. No, Derek kept his business separate. He said it was boring. Numbers and contracts. Nothing I'd find interesting. Grace heard the bitterness in her own voice. I was too stupid to realize that was a red flag. You weren't stupid. Claire appeared with fresh tea nobody wanted. You were in love. There's a difference. Was I, though? Grace looked up at her mother. I loved who I thought he was, the charming man who swept me off my feet, the successful businessman who made me feel special. But that man never existed, did he? It was all a performance, a mask. Tom cleared his throat. 6 months ago you called me. Derek had screamed at you for 20 minutes because dinner was cold. You were shaking when you told me. I could hear it in your voice. Grace remembered. She'd locked herself in the bathroom, called her father, whispered that she didn't know what to do. Tom had listened, given gentle advice about marriage counseling, suggested couples therapy, reminded her that all marriages have rough patches. Then he'd hung up and called Victor Reynolds to accelerate the investigation. I was trying to protect you, Tom said now, unable to meet her eyes. I thought if I could get enough evidence, arrest him on federal charges, you'd have leverage in a divorce. Protection. I thought I was giving you a way out. You were building a case? Grace said flatly. I was part of the evidence. The silence stretched. Clock ticked. Someone's phone buzzed. The universe continued spinning while Grace's world tilted on its axis. I was trying to do both, Tom finally said. Protect you and catch a criminal. I know now I should have chosen. Should have told you what I knew. Should have pulled you out regardless of the investigation. I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so damn sorry. Grace wanted to forgive him, wanted to understand. But the betrayal sat heavy in her chest, right next to the betrayal Derek had loaded there, right next to the betrayal of her own instincts she'd ignored for 4 years. Oh, how many people knew, Grace asked, that he was a criminal, that I was living with someone you were investigating? The FBI team, 6 agents, Marcus at the casino, that's it. And how many people suspected I was being abused? Tom's face crumpled. I don't know. Mom knew, Grace said, looking at Claire. Brooke suspected. My doctor probably wondered about the bruises I kept explaining away. Derek's assistant Jennifer probably saw signs before he fired her. His mother definitely knew her son had anger issues. Grace counted on her fingers. At least 6 people, maybe more, all watching, all staying silent. Claire sat down, took her daughter's hands. Baby, I've been a nurse for 35 years. I've seen domestic violence more times than I can count. And the hardest part isn't recognizing it. It's knowing that until the victim is ready to leave, there's nothing we can do. I couldn't force you to see it. I could only wait for you to be ready. And pray that when you are ready, it wouldn't be too late. It almost was too late, Grace whispered. Another few months, and she'd have been born into it, growing up watching her father treat her mother like property, learning that love comes with fear. The baby kicked hard, as if agreeing. Grace's phone rang. Unknown number again. She almost didn't answer. But something made her. Diane Whitmore's voice was ice. I've filed an injunction. You're not allowed to speak to the press. You're not allowed to disparage my son's name. If you think you're going to play victim on every news channel and ruin his reputation, you're mistaken. His reputation? Grace almost laughed. He hit me in front of 200 people, in a casino, on camera. He ruined his own reputation. A moment of stress. He'd lost money. You were nagging him. Any man would react. Grace hung up, blocked the number. Another call came through immediately. Derek's lawyer, this time, smooth and professional. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm calling on behalf of my client to discuss possible reconciliation. I'm not reconciling with a man who assaulted me. My client maintains that was a misunderstanding. Heat of the moment. He's prepared to enter anger management counseling, couples therapy, whatever it takes to repair the marriage and provide a stable home for your child. Tell your client, Grace said, voice steady despite her shaking hands, that the only thing I want from him is full custody and a divorce. I'll be retaining my own lawyer. She hung up. Turned to Tom. I need Brooke. Can you call her? Tell her I need the best divorce attorney she knows. Tell her it's going to get ugly. Tom was already dialing. Brooke Sinclair arrived within an hour, rolling 2 suitcases of legal files and a laptop case. Her first words were, I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. Grace blinked. You knew too? I suspected. Brooke set up her laptop at the dining table, pushing aside FBI files to make room. The way he isolated you, the way you stopped talking about your job, the way you flinched when you checked your phone. Grace, I'm a divorce attorney. I specialize in domestic violence cases. I know the signs, but you weren't ready to hear it. So you just waited? Grace heard the bitterness in her own voice. You just watched and said nothing? I said plenty. Brooke's voice was gentle but firm. Every time we talked, I asked if you were happy, if you felt safe, if you ever wanted to talk. You said you were fine, every single time. What was I supposed to do? Kidnap you? Force you into my car and drive you to a shelter? That's not how this works, Grace. You have to choose to leave, and you weren't ready until now. The truth hit Grace like cold water. She hadn't been ready. Even 6 months ago, even with the isolated house and the security system and the constant fear, she hadn't been ready to admit it was abuse, to admit her fairy tale marriage was a nightmare, to admit she'd made a mistake so big it could cost her everything, until last night, until a public slap forced the private shame into the light. Brooke pulled out documents. Now, let's talk strategy. His arrest gives us leverage. Your father's FBI case gives us ammunition, and I am very, very good at my job. Over the next hour, they built a war room. Brooke handling the divorce and custody case, Tom's FBI partner, Victor Reynolds, coordinating the federal prosecution, Claire documenting Grace's injuries and pregnancy health, Marcus providing surveillance footage from the casino. Grace sat in the middle of it all, feeling like the eye of a hurricane, calm at the center while chaos swirled around her. Her phone rang again. This time, her OB-GYN, Dr. Sarah Brennan. Grace, I need you to come in immediately. Your blood pressure readings from last night's ER visit are concerning. Grace had forgotten about the ER. After the casino, before going to her parents' house, EMTs had insisted on a quick check at the hospital. They'd monitored the baby's heartbeat, checked Grace's vitals, documented her injuries. Grace had been running on adrenaline, barely present. What's concerning about them? Grace asked. Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated. Stress-induced hypertension. Combined with your pregnancy, we need to monitor you closely. If it doesn't stabilize, we're looking at potential preeclampsia, possible early delivery. Grace's hand went to her belly protectively. The baby is fine right now. But Grace, stress is a medical issue, not just an emotional one. Your body is telling you something. I need you to come in today. We need to talk about your living situation, your stress levels, everything that might be affecting your health and your baby's health. An hour later, Grace sat in the familiar exam room. Dr. Brennan's face was serious as she reviewed Grace's chart. Your blood pressure is 140/95. That's stage 2 hypertension. In a pregnant woman, that's a red flag. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you feel safe where you're staying? I'm at my parents' house. And before that? Grace's throat closed. She couldn't speak, just shook her head. Dr. Brennan pulled out a form, started writing. I'm documenting everything, every bruise, every symptom of chronic stress, every panic attack you've mentioned in passing over the past 2 years. Grace, I've been your doctor for 4 years. I've watched you lose weight, watched you develop anxiety symptoms, watched you jump when your phone rings. I suspected, but I couldn't help you until you were ready to admit what was happening. Another person who'd seen, another person who'd stayed silent, waiting for Grace to be ready. Grace wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at all of them for not saving her, but she understood now. They couldn't save her. She had to save herself. They could only provide the tools once she decided to use them. This will matter in court, Dr. Brennan said gently. Your medical records prove the abuse was affecting your health and your baby's health. It's evidence that you feared for your safety long before last night. Physical evidence that corroborates your testimony. The ultrasound machine hummed. On the screen, Grace's daughter sucked her thumb, hiccuped, stretched. Unaware of the war being waged around her, innocent and perfect and worth fighting for. I won't let him hurt you, Grace whispered to the screen. I promise, whatever it takes. He'll never touch you. The baby seemed to hear, kicked once, strong and insistent. A fighter, just like her mother was learning to be. Grace left the doctor's office with a prescription for blood pressure medication and strict orders to minimize stress. She almost laughed. Minimize stress. While filing for divorce. Pressing assault charges, navigating an FBI investigation, and preparing for a custody battle. Sure, no problem. When she returned to her parents' house, police cars lined the street. Tom met her at the door, face grim. Derek made bail. Andy violated the restraining order. He's at the house right now. Your house. Loading your belongings into a truck. Grace's hands clenched. He doesn't know what he just did, does he? Tom's smile was cold. No, he doesn't, but he's about to find out. The 40-minute drive to the house felt like descending into Grace's own past. Every mile marker was a memory, every turn a reminder of how isolated she'd become. The city lights faded. Suburban neighborhoods gave way to rural roads. Trees closed in on both sides. Marcus Webb drove. Tom sat rigid in the passenger seat, FBI badge visible on his belt. Victor Reynolds followed in an unmarked car, 2 more agents with him. Grace had insisted on coming. It's my life, my things, I'm not hiding. Brooke sat in the back seat beside Grace, laptop open, already typing notes. You don't have to do this. We can get a police escort later. Retrieve your belongings through official channels. No, Grace's voice was steel. I need to see it. The house. Him. I need to look at the prison and know I'm free. She described the drive-by technique she'd developed over the past 6 months. Every time she returned home from her parents' Sunday dinners or trips to the grocery store, she'd sit in the driveway with the engine running. 3 deep breaths. Check phone for warning sign texts. If Derek was in a bad mood, his texts had a certain tone. Prepare her face. Neutral, pleasant, careful. Never smile too much or he'd ask what was funny. Never look sad or he'd ask what was wrong. Just careful neutrality. Like a soldier checking equipment before entering a war zone, Grace said softly. Home shouldn't feel like that. The house loomed ahead. Modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows, that Grace had once thought beautiful. Now she saw the design truth. Nowhere to hide. Every room visible from outside. Every movement trackable. Combined with the security system that alerted Derek's phone Whenever a door opened, it was a panopticon, a prison disguised as a dream home. Derek's Mercedes sat in the circular driveway. A moving truck idled beside it. As they pulled up, Derek emerged from the house, carrying a box of Grace's things. He froze when he saw the cars. Grace, baby, thank God. He set down the box, came toward them with open arms. This is all a misunderstanding. We need to talk. Work this out. For the baby. Marcus exited first, security credentials visible. Mr. Whitmore, step back. You're in violation of a restraining order. You're not supposed to be within 100 feet of Ms. Hoffman. This is my house. My property. Derek's face flushed, anger rising. She can't just kick me out of my own house. Actually, Brooke stepped forward, documents in hand. California is a community property state. This house is 50% hers, regardless of whose name is on the deed. And you're trespassing on what is currently considered a crime scene, given the ongoing investigation into your business activities. Victor Reynolds emerged from the second car, FBI badge out. Derek Whitmore, you're under arrest. Violation of a protective order. Obstruction of justice. He smiled, cold and professional. And let's add the 18 counts of money laundering, wire fraud, and tax evasion we've been sitting on. You have the right to remain silent. Derek's face went from red to white. You set this up. You used your own daughter as bait. You son of a... Tom stepped forward. I protected my daughter from a criminal who was hiding behind a marriage license. There's a difference. You chose to build a real estate empire on fraud. You chose to launder money through fake companies. And you chose to abuse your pregnant wife. Every choice has consequences, Derek. Welcome to yours. As federal agents moved in with handcuffs, another car pulled up. Diane Whitmore climbed out, her personal lawyer beside her. Then another car. Press. Someone had tipped off the media. Cameras appeared. Lights. Reporters shouting questions. Is it true the FBI has been investigating Derek Whitmore for money laundering? Mrs. Whitmore, how long have you known about your husband's criminal activities? Grace, are you afraid he'll get custody? Grace stood frozen in the spotlight. Camera flashes, exploding. Diane's voice rising in fury. You gold-digging little... Diane pushed past her lawyer. You trapped my son. Got pregnant on purpose. Now you're using your FBI father to destroy him. You're destroying our family for money and attention. Grace felt the words like physical blows. The script she'd been told for 4 years. You're not good enough. You're lucky he chose you. You owe him everything. You're nothing without him. But Grace's hand rested on her belly, her daughter. And something shifted. Something broke open in her chest. I loved your son, Grace heard herself say. Her voice cut through the chaos. Clear. Final. I would have given him everything, but he chose violence. He chose lies. He chose to destroy the family I was trying to build. This... She gestured to the police, the press, the federal agents, the chaos. This is what he created, not me. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. The cameras captured everything. Diane's rage, Derek's handcuffs, Grace's quiet dignity, Tom's protective arm around his daughter's shoulders. Brooke whispered, "That was perfect. Keep that energy for the custody hearing." They loaded Derek into the federal vehicle. He went quietly this time. The fight drained out of him. As they drove away, Grace walked through the house one final time. The kitchen where she'd made perfect meals for a man who criticized every bite. The living room where he'd monitored her phone, demanded to see every text, every email, every interaction. The bedroom where she'd learned to fake sleep to avoid him. The bathroom where she'd had panic attacks on the tile floor at 2 in the morning. And the nursery. The yellow room she'd decorated in secret, hiding paint samples and receipts because Derek had wanted to be surprised. Except Grace had already known she was having a daughter. The ultrasound tech had told her. Grace had kept it secret, some instinct telling her to keep something for herself. Some small thing Derek couldn't control. She ran her hand over the empty crib. "We're not coming back here, baby girl. I'm taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere with people who love us. Somewhere you can cry without me being afraid of waking your father." Grace opened Derek's home office. The FBI would be here within hours to collect evidence, but Grace needed to see for herself, needed to understand the scope of his lies. His computer sat open, emails still logged in. Grace knew she probably shouldn't look, knew the FBI would want it pristine for evidence. But she couldn't stop herself. The first email was to a woman named Ashley. "Can't wait to see you this weekend. Told my wife I have a business conference." Grace scrolled. More emails, more women. Not just Ashley, Rebecca, Melissa. 3 different affairs, some overlapping. Messages going back years. Some from before the wedding. 4 years of marriage. 4 years of "I love you." 4 years of "you're the only one." All lies. And the most recent message, sent this morning from jail using a contraband phone. The bitch finally showed her true colors. "But I've got custody lawyers ready. No court will give a child to a woman who falsely accuses the father. I'll demand a paternity test. The baby might not even be mine." Grace sat down in Derek's leather chair. The baby kicked, strong, insistent, definitely his, unfortunately. The DNA would prove it if it came to that, but it didn't matter. Biology didn't make a father. Derek had contributed sperm, that was all. He would never be a dad. Never midnight feedings or first words or skinned knees or bedtime stories. He'd be a name on legal documents, a child support check, a cautionary tale. Grace screenshotted everything, forwarded it to Brooke, forwarded it to her father. Evidence, ammunition, proof of pattern. Then she stood up and walked out of Derek Whitmore's house for the last time. 3 in the morning. Grace lay in her childhood bed, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars and listening to the baby move. Constant movement. The doctor said babies could sense maternal stress. Her daughter was stressed because Grace was stressed. A cycle. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Grace had made the mistake of turning it back on. 57 new text messages from blocked numbers. "You'll regret this. I'll take her from you the day she's born. I know where your parents live. You think you're safe. You're not safe. I'll make you wish you'd never been born." Grace blocked each number. New messages came through immediately from different numbers. Derek reaching out from jail using God knows what contraband phones, or his mother conducting the harassment campaign, or his lawyer trying to intimidate her into dropping charges. The message was clear. This isn't over. This will never be over. You'll never be free. Grace's chest tightened. Her breath came short. Panic attack starting. She'd gotten so good at having them silently, sitting on the bathroom floor, counting tiles, breathing in 4s, telling herself, just make it through today. Just get through this hour. Just survive the next 10 minutes. She'd become an expert at survival. But surviving wasn't living. Grace pulled herself out of bed, padded to the bathroom, sank to the familiar tile floor, cool porcelain against her back, one hand on her belly, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. The baby kicked in time with her breathing, like she was trying to help. Like she was saying, "I'm here, Mama. We're in this together." Grace pulled out her phone, called Brooke. 3:30 in the morning. Brooke answered on the second ring, voice alert. "Grace, what's wrong?" "I can't do this." Grace's voice cracked. The custody battle, the divorce, raising her alone, the texts, the threats, the lawyers. "I can't. He's right. What judge is going to give me full custody? He's rich, connected. His lawyers will destroy me. They'll twist everything. They'll make me look crazy, unstable, vindictive. Grace, Brooke's voice cut through the spiral. Listen to me. You have evidence. Medical records documenting years of injuries. FBI testimony that he's a criminal. Surveillance footage of him hitting you. Witness statements from 200 people at the casino. His own emails admitting to affairs and plans to manipulate custody. You have everything. He has money. Money always wins. Silence on the line. Then Brooke said, very quietly, "Not always, not this time, Grace. I've been a divorce attorney for 10 years. I've seen rich men lose custody. I've seen powerful men exposed. I've seen women with nothing except the truth win against men with everything except integrity. Money helps, but evidence wins, and we have evidence. But what if it's not enough?" Grace whispered. "What if I go through all of this, the public humiliation, the trial, reliving every moment, and he still gets joint custody? What if my daughter has to spend weekends with him? What if she grows up thinking that's what love looks like?" "Then we fight harder," Brooke said. "But Grace, you can't think that way. You can't spiral into worst-case scenarios at 3 in the morning. That's anxiety talking, not reality. Here's reality. Derek Whitmore is facing federal charges. 18 years minimum if convicted. By the time he gets out, your daughter will be an adult. She'll never know him. She'll only know you. And you will have spent those 18 years showing her what real love looks like, what real strength looks like, what it means to protect yourself and the people you care about." Grace let the words sink in. 18 years. Her daughter would be 19 by the time Derek got out of federal prison. The assault charges were separate. State charges, not federal, but those could add more time. Her daughter might never remember her father as anything except photographs and stories, might never have to experience his rage firsthand, might grow up safe. "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "I know, that's normal. You spent 4 years being controlled. Your nervous system is still expecting attack. Give yourself time to adjust. Fear doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. Fear means you're human." Grace thanked Brooke and hung up, sat on the bathroom floor for a while longer, just breathing, the panic attack ebbing, leaving behind exhaustion and determination in equal measure. She walked through her parents' house, touching familiar things. Her mother's teacup collection displayed in the china cabinet, each one a souvenir from a different vacation, a different moment of joy. Her father's Marine Corps, medals in a shadow box by the TV, reminders that he'd faced fear and survived. Family photos covering the walls, Grace at 5 on her first bicycle, gap-toothed and grinning. At 12 with braces and an awkward phase. At 18 in her graduation cap. At 23 at her gallery's opening exhibit. Eyes bright with dreams. That woman felt like a stranger. The one who thought the world was full of possibility. Who believed in fairy tales. Who trusted too easily. But maybe she wasn't entirely gone. Maybe she was just buried, waiting to resurface. Grace stopped at her wedding photo. Professional portrait, expensive photographer. Grace in a designer dress, Derek in a custom tuxedo. Both smiling, both perfect. Both lying, she took the photo down, opened the frame, slid the picture out, ripped it once, twice, 3 times, threw the pieces in the trash. The empty frame she kept. She'd put a picture of her daughter there, proof that something good came from something terrible. Claire found her in the hallway at 4 in the morning, didn't speak, just wrapped a blanket around Grace's shoulders and guided her to the couch. Made chamomile tea that neither of them would drink. Sat beside her daughter in the quiet darkness. "I failed her," Grace whispered. "My daughter. She's not even born yet, and I've already failed her. I brought her into a mess. I stayed too long. I ignored the signs. No, Claire's voice was firm. You got her out. You chose her safety over your comfort. You left when you were ready, when you could, when you had the strength. That's not failure. That's heroism. I should have left sooner. Stop. Claire took Grace's hands. Baby, listen to me. I've been a nurse for 35 years. I've seen women stay in worse for longer. I've seen women who never leave. I've seen women die because they couldn't find a way out. You got out. You're alive. You're fighting back. You're protecting your child. That's everything. Stop punishing yourself for not being perfect. Start celebrating that you survived. Grace wanted to believe it, wanted to stop the endless cycle of what if I had and I should have and why didn't I? But the guilt sat heavy. 4 years, 48 months, approximately 1,460 days of choosing to stay. Except she hadn't really chosen, had she? She'd been manipulated, isolated, gaslit, controlled. Choice requires freedom. Grace hadn't been free. She'd been trapped in a cage so beautiful, she hadn't recognized the bars. Tom knocked on the door. Gentle, hesitant. Gracie, you need to see this. The morning news played on TV. Derek's arrest was the lead story. Millionaire real estate developer, arrested in casino assault, FBI, says bigger charges coming. Grace watched her own face on screen. The casino surveillance footage, crystal clear. Derek's hand connecting with her face. Her collapse. Tom's intervention. Derek's arrest. Then footage from yesterday. Derek being arrested at the house. Screaming at cameras. My wife is mentally unstable. She's using her FBI father to destroy me. This is a conspiracy to ruin my reputation. I've never hurt her. This is all fabricated. The news anchor cut to an interview with a domestic violence expert. A woman Grace didn't know, speaking with authority. What we're seeing here is textbook abuser behavior. Blame the victim. Claim conspiracy. Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Use wealth and connections to avoid consequences. Mr. Whitmore's statements are a perfect example of how abusers try to manipulate public perception. Grace's phone exploded, messages from college friends she hadn't spoken to in years, former coworkers from the gallery, old neighbors from before the move, all saying some version of the same thing. I saw the news. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. What can I do? People she'd lost touch with because Derek had isolated her. People who'd watched her disappear into marriage. People who'd probably wondered what happened to Grace Hoffman, but never reached out because, well, you don't interfere in someone's marriage, do you? But they were reaching out now, offering support now that it was public, now that it was real, now that they couldn't pretend not to see. Better late than never, Grace supposed, though she couldn't help the bitter thought. Where were you 2 years ago? 3 years ago? When I was drowning and you could have thrown me a rope? But she understood. She did. No one wants to believe their friend's perfect husband is a monster. No one wants to make accusations without proof. No one wants to be wrong. It was easier to believe the fairy tale. Easier to accept Grace's excuses. Easier to trust that if something was really wrong, she'd ask for help. Except abuse didn't work like that. Abusers made sure victims couldn't ask for help, couldn't admit what was happening, couldn't even recognize it themselves until it was almost too late. Grace was one of the lucky ones. She got out. She was alive. Her daughter was safe. Some women weren't that lucky. Grace turned off the TV, turned off her phone, sat in silence with her parents on either side of her, and her daughter, kicking in her belly, and tried to feel something other than exhausted. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and court dates and custody hearings. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. But today she just needed to breathe, to rest, to survive one more day. Tomorrow she could fight. Today she could simply exist. And that was enough. The courthouse steps were packed. Grace hadn't anticipated this. Somehow she'd imagined slipping in quietly through a side entrance. Private hearing, closed courtroom. Just her and Derek and the lawyers and the judge. Instead, press everywhere. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions, a crowd of people holding signs, some supporting her. We believe Grace. Abuse is not love. Protect mothers. Others supporting Derek. Innocent until proven guilty. False accusations destroy lives. Grace sat in Brooke's car, hands trembling. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Brooke's voice was steady. Neutral expression. No comments to press. I'll handle everything. You just walk. Tom and Marcus will be on either side. We're going straight in. Grace nodded. She was wearing her mother's navy dress because everything she owned had been chosen by Derek. Conservative, appropriate, borrowed armor. Her belly was impossible to hide now. 30 weeks pregnant. The whole world would see her waddle up those courthouse steps. Visibly vulnerable, visibly pregnant, visibly the victim. Part of her hated it. Hated being seen as weak, as someone who needed protection. But another part recognized the truth. She was vulnerable right now. She did need protection. And there was strength in admitting that. Starting over feels impossible, Grace whispered, hand on her belly, but staying would have been worse. They exited the car. Camera flashes exploded. Grace kept her eyes forward, focusing on the courthouse doors. Tom flanked her left side, Brooke her right. Marcus cleared a path through the crowd. Grace, did you know about your husband's crimes? Grace, are you afraid he'll get custody? Grace, were you involved in the FBI investigation? Grace, how long has he been abusing you? The questions pelted her like rain. Grace kept walking, one foot in front of the other. Breathe in, breathe out. Almost there. Then Diane Whitmore appeared, her lawyer beside her, blocking the path. That's her! Diane's voice cut through the noise. That's the woman who destroyed my son's life, using her FBI father to fabricate charges, trying to steal my grandson before he's even born. My son is innocent. He's a good man, a successful businessman, and she, Diane pointed at Grace with a trembling, accusatory finger. She's vindictive, manipulative. She trapped him with that pregnancy. Something snapped in Grace. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the months of accepting blame for Derek's actions, gone, replaced by fury. She stopped walking. Against Brooke's whispered warning, against every instinct telling her to stay silent, stay neutral, don't engage, Grace turned to face the cameras. My daughter. Her voice was surprisingly steady. Will never know what it's like to flinch when her father walks in the room. She'll never learn that love comes with bruises. She'll never apologize for making someone else angry. She'll never spend her wedding day twisting her ring and wondering if she's making a mistake. She'll never grow up thinking a man's rage is her responsibility to manage. Grace paused. Let the words sink in. That's not destroying a family. That's saving one. Silence. Then cameras clicked furiously. Reporters scribbling notes. Diane's face went purple. You, how dare you? Grace turned and walked into the courthouse. Didn't look back. Didn't listen to Diane's continued ranting. Just walked. Inside, Brooke squeezed her arm. That was perfect. Stick to exactly that message. Simple, powerful, focused on your daughter's safety, not on revenge or anger. The courtroom was packed too. Gallery full of reporters, victim advocates, domestic violence counselors, and women Grace didn't recognize, holding signs, wearing purple ribbons, sitting in solidarity. Grace's throat tightened. Strangers, women who didn't know her, but who knew her story. who'd lived their own versions of it, who understood. Derek entered in an Orange County Jail jumpsuit. No expensive suit today, no custom shoes, no mask of respectability, just a man in handcuffs. His privilege stripped away. His eyes found Grace immediately. The look he gave her could freeze blood, pure hatred, thinly veiled threat. The look that said, "You'll pay for this? I'll destroy you. You're mine. And if I can't have you, I'll make sure no one can." Grace didn't look away, didn't flinch, held his gaze until he was the one who broke eye contact. She described it later to Brooke. Every woman in that courtroom knew that look. The "you'll pay for this" look. The "I'll destroy you" look. It's a look that needs no translation. Every survivor recognized it immediately. The judge entered, Honorable Patricia Rowland, 60 years old, steel gray hair pulled back in a bun. Expression that suggested she'd seen everything and was impressed by nothing. All rise. The Superior Court of California is now in session. They sat. Derek's lawyer stood, smooth, professional, expensive haircut, and a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. This is a tragic misunderstanding blown wildly out of proportion by an overzealous father-in-law with FBI resources. My client, Derek Whitmore, is a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. He's donated to local charities, employed hundreds of people, created affordable housing developments across 3 counties. He's a man of excellent character who made one mistake in a moment of extreme stress. Judge Rowland's expression didn't change. Counselor, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. Your client struck his 7 months pregnant wife in a crowded casino. This was captured on multiple cameras from multiple angles, witnessed by dozens, including 3 off-duty police officers. Calling that a misunderstanding stretches credulity. Your Honor, the defense contends there's more to the story, but so I'm sure there is. We'll hear it at trial. Now, regarding bail. Derek's lawyer straightened. Your Honor, we request my client be released on his own recognizance. He has substantial ties to the community, multiple properties, a business to run. He's not a flight risk. He's already proven he's a flight risk, Judge Rowland interrupted. Or did you forget the part where he violated his restraining order less than 24 hours after being released, where he went to the marital home despite explicit orders to stay away from the victim and the property? Your Honor, he was merely retrieving personal belongings, while the victim happened to arrive. What a coincidence! Judge Rowland's tone could cut glass. Bail is denied. Mr. Whitmore will remain in custody until trial. Derek exploded. This is bullshit. She's lying about everything. The baby probably isn't even mine. I demand a paternity test. She's vindictive, manipulative. She's using her father's FBI position to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. This is a conspiracy. Mr. Whitmore? Judge Rowland's voice dropped to absolute 0. One more outburst, and I will add contempt of court to your growing list of charges. Do you understand? Derek's lawyer physically restrained him, whispered frantically in his ear. Derek subsided, but his eyes never left Grace. Promising revenge, promising pain, Grace watched this man, who had controlled her for 4 years through fear and manipulation, being controlled, being silenced, being told no by someone with more authority than he had. The power dynamic had reversed so completely it felt surreal. They set a trial date, discussed motions, went through legal procedures. Grace barely followed. She sat with her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick, and thought, "You're safe. He can't reach us. He can't hurt us. We're free." Outside the courthouse afterward, Grace couldn't avoid the press. They surrounded her car. Brooke tried to run interference. But one woman, mid-40s, kind eyes, stepped forward carefully. I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted you to know. I left my husband 2 years ago. He never hit me, but the control, the isolation, the constant criticism, I thought I was going crazy, thought I was imagining it, making a big deal out of nothing. Seeing you stand up there and speak, naming what it was, it helped me remember I wasn't crazy either. So, thank you. The woman walked away before Grace could respond. Then another woman approached. Younger, maybe late 20s. I'm planning to leave next month. I've been saving money in secret, talking to a lawyer. Your story gave me courage. Thank you. Then another. I stayed 15 years, left last year. Best decision I ever made. Then another. I wish I'd left. He's gone now, heart attack. But I wasted 30 years being afraid. Don't waste any more time, honey. You're doing the right thing. Grace realized she'd become something she never intended. A symbol, a representative, the public face of every woman who'd been here, who'd faced this choice, who'd wondered if leaving was possible. The weight of it crushed and elevated simultaneously. All these women, all these stories, all connected by the same thread of surviving someone who was supposed to love them. Brooke guided Grace to the car. They drove in silence for a while. Then Brooke said quietly, Grace, we have a problem. A big one. Grace's stomach sank. What now? Diane Whitmore filed an emergency petition with family court. She wants temporary custody of your baby, her grandchild, upon birth. She's claiming you're an unfit mother, mentally unstable, using your father's FBI position to fabricate abuse claims for financial gain. She wants the baby placed with her immediately after delivery until the custody case resolves. Grace's hands tightened on her belly. She can't, can she? She can file. It's a frivolous petition. We'll win. But Grace, it means the custody battle starts before your daughter is even born. We need to prepare for a fight. Grace leaned her head against the car window, watched the city slide past, thought about her daughter, about bringing her into a world where people were already fighting over her, where her own grandmother was trying to take her away from her mother. Let her try, Grace said finally. Let them all try. My daughter is mine. I carried her. I protected her. I left her father to keep her safe. No judge is giving her to the woman who raised an abuser. Brooke smiled grimly. That's the energy we need. Hold on to it, because this is just beginning. The hospital's family law clinic smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Grace sat in a chair designed to be non-threatening, soft cushions, calming blue color, and faced three people who would help determine her daughter's future. Patricia, the social worker, gentle eyes, efficient manner, taking notes on everything. Margaret, the guardian ad litem, appointed to represent the baby's interests. Stern, professional, no visible empathy, and Brooke, her lawyer, her advocate, her shield. Mrs. Whitmore, Margaret began. Ms. Hoffman, Grace interrupted quietly. I'm filing to return to my maiden name. My daughter will be Hoffman too, not Whitmore. I don't want her carrying his name. Margaret made a note. Ms. Hoffman, I'll be frank with you. Your mother-in-law's petition has significant holes in it, but judges do take grandparent rights seriously, especially when the father is incarcerated and the mother is... She paused delicately. In a vulnerable position. Vulnerable. Grace tasted the word. You mean pregnant and recently escaped from domestic violence? Yes. And Diane Whitmore's argument is that because I'm vulnerable, my daughter should be taken from me and given to the woman who enabled her son's abuse. Do I have that right? Margaret's expression softened slightly. When you put it that way, it sounds absurd. But family court doesn't always make decisions that seem logical to the layperson. They make decisions based on what they believe serves the child's best interests. Diane is arguing that she can provide a stable, two-parent household. She's married, financially secure, has no criminal record. You're arguing that you can provide safety, which is important, but you're also currently unemployed, living with your parents, facing a contentious divorce, and dealing with trauma. I have trauma because her son gave it to me, Grace said evenly. I'm unemployed because he forced me to quit my job. I'm living with my parents because he made it financially impossible for me to leave. Everything she's using against me is the result of her son's abuse. I understand that, and that's what we'll argue. But you need to understand, this won't be easy. Brooke leaned forward. Grace has been documenting everything since the night of the assault. Every text, every call, every threat. She's built a timeline, and she has medical evidence going back 2 years showing patterns consistent with abuse. Patricia, the social worker, spoke up. Tools. Hoffman, can you tell me about your current living situation? Grace described it. Her parents' house, her childhood bedroom, her mother monitoring her blood pressure daily, her father providing security and emotional support. Brooke coordinating the legal strategy. Dr. Brennan monitoring the pregnancy. The therapist she'd started seeing twice weekly. The domestic violence support group she'd joined. The support group helped most, Grace admitted. Hearing other women's stories, realizing I'm not alone, not weak, not crazy. There were 12 of us, all different ages, different backgrounds, but all with the same story arc. She described it. He was charming at first. The control started small. It escalated. They stayed because leaving seemed impossible. Until the day staying became more impossible than leaving. We're all the same woman, Grace said softly. Just wearing different faces, different details, same core story. Patricia made notes, asked about employment plans. Grace explained she'd been offered her old position at the gallery. Manager now, better pay, flexible hours after maternity leave. She'd start part-time after the baby came, full-time once childcare was arranged. And you'll be financially independent? Brooke is pursuing full spousal support and child support in the divorce, plus division of assets. I'm entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, the house, investments, his business interests, though those might be seized by the government depending on his criminal trial. And emotionally, how are you handling the stress? Grace was honest. Not well. I have panic attacks, mostly at night. I take medication for blood pressure. I see a therapist. I cry more than I'd like. But I'm handling it. I'm surviving. And I'm building a support network. Not just my parents. Friends I'd lost touch with are reaching out. Women from the support group. Even strangers who've heard my story and want to help. Margaret watched Grace carefully throughout. At the end, she said, Miss Hoffman, in my 20 years as a guardian ad litem, I've learned something important. The question isn't, why didn't she leave sooner? That's what people ask, but it's the wrong question. The right question is, how did she find the strength to leave it all? You left while 7 months pregnant, financially dependent, legally vulnerable, facing a man with significant resources who'd already proven he'd hurt you. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary courage. Something in Grace's chest loosened, validation from a stranger who'd seen hundreds of cases, who knew the patterns, who believed her. I know others judge me for not leaving sooner, Grace said carefully, but unless you've been there, you can't understand. How he made me doubt my own reality, how he isolated me so gradually I didn't notice until I had nowhere to go, how he made me believe I deserved it, that I was too sensitive, too emotional, making something out of nothing. Brooke's phone rang. She stepped out, returned looking stunned. That was Jennifer Morrison, Derek's former assistant. She wants to testify on your behalf in the custody hearing. Grace blinked. Jennifer who? The woman Derek had an affair with 3 years ago, before he fired her to cover it up. Brooke's expression was fierce satisfaction. She kept everything: emails, texts, recordings. She documented his pattern of control, manipulation, and threats. She's willing to provide it all to establish his character. Grace's mind reeled. Derek's victim, his former mistress, becoming Grace's ally. Jennifer arrived at the clinic an hour later, 35 years old, professional blazer, and careful makeup. She looked at Grace with an expression mixing pity and recognition. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said immediately, "for not warning you. When Derek started dating you, I thought about reaching out, about telling you what he was really like, but I was scared. He'd threatened my career, my reputation. He has powerful friends. I got a new job, moved on, tried to pretend it never happened. But you're here now," Grace said. "I saw the news, saw you standing on those courthouse steps, pregnant and brave and saying your daughter won't grow up afraid. And I thought, I can't let him do to her what he did to me, what he did to you. I can't stay quiet anymore, not with a child involved." Jennifer's story unfolded like a horror film mirror of Grace's. The charm offensive, Derek sweeping her off her feet, the gradual isolation. She stopped going out with friends because he wanted to spend every evening together. The explosive anger over small things, the control. He tracked her phone, showed up at her apartment unannounced, insisted on knowing where she was every moment. "He never hit me," Jennifer said. "But he scared me. One night I said I needed space. He put his fist through my apartment wall. Told me if I ever broke up with him, he'd make sure I never worked in real estate again. He knew everyone, had connections everywhere. One word from him and I'd be blacklisted." "So what did you do?" Grace asked. "I documented everything, started secretly recording our conversations. Saving his texts and emails, I told myself it was insurance, in case he tried to ruin me. Then one day he just ended it, said he'd met someone new, someone better, said I was getting too clingy anyway." Grace closed her eyes. "That someone was me. Yes, I'm sorry." "Don't be. You tried to survive him. So did I. We both did what we had to do." Jennifer provided everything to Brooke. 3 years of documentation, proof that Derek's pattern with Grace wasn't isolated, that he had a history of controlling behavior, threats, manipulation. It was damning evidence, beautiful, perfect, damning evidence. After Jennifer left, Grace sat alone in the clinic's meditation room, candles flickering, soft instrumental music playing, lavender scent in the air. She placed both hands on her belly. "You're gathering an army, little one," Grace whispered. "People I never expected. People who understand what it's like to survive someone dangerous. We're going to protect you. All of us together. You're going to grow up knowing you're loved. You're safe, and you never have to earn that safety by being perfect." The baby kicked in response. Strong, insistent, fighter, just like her mother. Brooke knocked softly, entered, sat beside Grace. "Derek's criminal trial date is set. 3 weeks from now for the federal charges. The assault trial will be separate, probably a few months later. But Grace?" She hesitated. "His lawyers made an offer. They want to deal. What kind of deal?" "He'll plead guilty to lesser assault charges. Agree to supervised visitation only after release from federal prison. Sign over primary custody to you, 80-20 split. Won't contest the divorce settlement. In exchange, you agree to seal all court records. No public testimony about the abuse. No media coverage. Everything stays private." Grace's hands clenched. "He wants to buy my silence. He wants to protect his reputation, or what's left of it, his business, his mother's social standing, his image." "What do you recommend?" Brooke met her eyes. I recommend you do what's best for you and your daughter. Not what's best for other women who might need your testimony. Not what's best for the FBI's case. They have enough evidence without you. What's best for your family. Grace closed her eyes. The easy path versus the right path. Privacy versus visibility. Peace versus justice. She thought about Jennifer, who'd stayed silent for 3 years carrying that weight, about the women on the courthouse steps, about the woman in the support group who'd said, I wish I'd been brave enough to testify. Maybe it would have stopped him from doing it again to his next wife. I want... Grace's voice caught. I want my daughter to know that when someone hurts you, you don't protect them to protect yourself. You speak up, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. You speak the truth. She opened her eyes, looked at Brooke. I'm not taking the deal. I'm testifying. Public trial, public record. Let everyone see what Derek Whitmore really is. Brooke smiled, fierce and proud. Okay then, let's make sure we win. 4 weeks after the arrest, Grace walked through the farmer's market with her mother. Sunday morning, bright sun, the baby had grown. 32 weeks now. Grace's belly was impossible to ignore. She waddled more than walked. Her back ached constantly, but she was free, and that made everything bearable. What sounds good for breakfast? Claire asked, studying a display of fresh pastries. Everything. I'm perpetually hungry. Grace selected a cinnamon roll the size of her face. This baby has expensive taste. They walked past vendors selling flowers, vegetables, handmade jewelry. Normal people doing normal things. Grace had forgotten what normal felt like. 4 years of walking on eggshells, of monitoring Derek's moods, of being afraid in her own home. Now she could buy a cinnamon roll the size of her face without asking permission, could spend money without explaining the expense, could smile at strangers without wondering if Derek would accuse her of flirting. Small freedoms, tiny victories. They added up. Victory number 1, her own bank account. Brooke had secured emergency spousal support, $15,000 per month, until the divorce settled. It was Derek's money, yes. Came from his accounts. But the court had ordered it. He had no choice. Grace deposited the first check with trembling hands, stood at the bank ATM with her new debit card, withdrew $20 just to prove she could. Her card, her PIN, her money to control. What are you going to buy first? Claire had asked. Nothing, Grace admitted. I just wanted to know I could. Victory number 2, her own apartment. Small 1-bedroom, 2nd floor of an older building. Not fancy, not new, but hers. Not Derek's, not her parents'. Hers. She'd toured it with Claire last week. The landlord, a woman in her 60s, had looked at Grace's pregnant belly with concern. You'll be raising a baby alone? Yes. Grace didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't apologize. Rent is $2,000 a month. First, last, and security deposit. That's $6,000 up front. Grace wrote the check without hesitation. The landlord stared. Most people need time to think, to discuss with family, to check their finances. I've been thinking about it for 4 years, Grace replied. I'll take it. Moving in next week, her father and Harrison from the gallery were bringing furniture. The nursery would be simple. Crib, changing table, rocking chair. Everything secondhand or borrowed. Grace didn't care. It would be theirs. Safe space, home. Victory number 3, her job back. Grace had visited the gallery yesterday, heart in her throat. Harrison had stared at her, pregnant, bruised, fading now but still visible, exhausted. Grace, my God, I saw the news. I should have said something. Years ago, when you quit, I knew something was wrong. You couldn't have stopped me, Grace said. I wasn't ready to listen, but I'm ready now, and I need a job. Part-time until the baby comes. Full-time after maternity leave, if you're hiring. Harrison recovered quickly, professional mask sliding into place. Your old position is filled, but I'm opening a second location across town. I need a manager. Better pay, more responsibility, flexible hours for after the baby. Can you start next week? Grace's throat tightened. You'd hire me, knowing my situation, the media attention, the scandal. I'm hiring you because of your situation. Harrison's expression softened. Grace, you walked away from this gallery because your husband told you to. You were the best curator I'd ever had. You think I'm going to let Derek Whitmore's tantrums dictate my hiring decisions? You're talented, you're driven, and you're a survivor. That's exactly who I want managing my new location. Grace started crying right there in the gallery. Ugly crying, hormones and relief and gratitude all mixed together. Harrison handed her tissues. You start Monday, 9 to 2, your choice of days. After the baby, we'll figure out what works. And Grace, the answer is yes, to whatever accommodations you need. Bring the baby to work if you have to. Take breaks to pump. Leave early for doctor appointments. Whatever you need, we'll make it work. Now, walking through the farmer's market, Grace felt pieces of herself clicking back into place. Her name filed the paperwork yesterday to officially change back to Hoffman. Her bank account growing with spousal support deposits. Her apartment move-in date set. Her job starting Monday. Her daughter kicking constantly, reminding Grace why all of this mattered. I'd forgotten I existed outside of being his wife, Grace said to her mother. I'd erased myself so slowly I didn't notice until I started rebuilding. Like disappearing one cell at a time, by the end, I couldn't remember who I was before him. Claire squeezed her hand. You're remembering now, that's what matters. Therapy twice a week with Dr. Monica helped. Grace had been skeptical at first. Talking about feelings seemed indulgent when she had so many practical problems. But Dr. Monica explained it differently. Your nervous system spent 4 years in survival mode. Fight, flight, or freeze. Constantly. That does physical damage, emotional damage. You can't just flip a switch and return to normal. You have to rewire your brain. Teach your body that you're safe now, that you can relax. When does it get better? Grace had asked. When you stop asking that question, Dr. Monica said gently, when you realize you're already better than you were, just differently. Grace carried that thought with her. She wasn't the same woman who'd married Derek, that Grace was gone. Dead, maybe. Or maybe just transformed into something else, something harder, something that knew the truth about fairy tales. This Grace was a fighter, a survivor, a mother-to-be who'd walked through fire to protect her daughter. This Grace was enough. The decision came 3 days later. Grace sat in Brooke's office, staring at the plea deal contract. Derek's lawyers had sweetened the offer. Lesser charges, minimal jail time for the assault, 6 months county credit for time served, supervised visitation rights starting after federal release, 50-50 custody split eventually, generous child support, quick, quiet divorce. All she had to do was stay silent, seal the records, disappear. If you take it, Brooke explained, everything stays quiet. Derek serves his federal time for the money laundering. That's not negotiable. The FBI won't deal on that. But the assault case goes away quietly. Divorce settles fast. Custody is mostly yours, with supervised visits. All records sealed. Your life goes back to private. And if I don't? Public trial. Your testimony on the stand, cross-examination, his lawyers will attack your credibility. They'll bring up every argument you ever had, every time you forgave him. They'll ask why you stayed if it was so bad. They'll imply you're lying for money. The media will cover every moment. It'll be brutal. Grace stared at her signature line. Unsigned. What would you do? Brooke leaned back, considered. I'd ask what kind of mother you want to be. Do you want to teach your daughter that silence is safety? That avoiding conflict is smart? That protecting powerful men is the price of peace? She paused. Or do you want to teach her that speaking truth is strength? That some things are worth fighting for even when the fight is hard? That women don't have to make themselves small to keep men comfortable? Grace thought about Jennifer, 3 years of silence, 3 years of carrying the weight of what Derek had done, 3 years of wondering if speaking up would have stopped him from doing it again. Grace thought about the women on the courthouse steps, the ones holding signs, the ones who'd approached her with stories of their own, the ones who said, "Thank you for speaking up. You gave me courage." Grace thought about her daughter, growing up, facing her own challenges, making her own choices about when to speak and when to stay silent. What example did Grace want to set? She pushed the contract away unsigned. I'm testifying. Public trial. Public record. My daughter needs to know I chose truth over comfort. Brooke smiled. Then let's prepare you to win. Derek's federal trial concluded in 4 days. Grace wasn't required to testify. The money laundering case had nothing to do with her. She watched from the gallery anyway. Needed to see it. Needed to watch him face consequences. The prosecution built their case methodically. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified records, millions of dollars funneled through fake real estate deals. Derek's fingerprints on everything. His defense tried to argue ignorance. Derek was the face of the company, but he didn't handle finances personally. His accountant was responsible, his CFO, his lawyers, anyone but Derek. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty on all 18 counts. Money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, federal crimes carrying serious time. The judge sentenced him 2 weeks later. 18 years federal prison, eligible for parole after 14 if he maintained good behavior. Fines, restitution, forfeiture of assets. Grace watched Derek's face as the sentence was read. Expected rage, saw fear instead. Real fear, the first time she'd seen him genuinely afraid. He wasn't in control anymore. Wasn't the powerful one. Just a man in handcuffs, facing consequences for his choices. The assault trial was scheduled for 2 weeks after that. Grace prepared with Brooke every day. They practiced her testimony, anticipated defense questions, prepared for cross-examination. They're going to attack you, Brooke warned. They'll make you sound crazy, vindictive. They'll twist everything. Are you ready for that? I don't know, Grace admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. The trial lasted 3 days. Grace testified on day 2. She wore her mother's navy dress again. Armor. Her belly was enormous now. 36 weeks pregnant. Due in a month. The jury couldn't miss it. The pregnant woman testifying against the father of her child. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Sat down carefully, belly making it awkward. The prosecutor was gentle, led her through the timeline, their relationship, the early warning signs, the escalation, the isolation, the abuse, the final slap in the casino. Grace told it all, her voice steady. She'd practiced this, knew what to say, how to say it, what details mattered. Then came cross-examination. Derek's lawyer stood. Expensive suit, professional smile, predator eyes. Mrs. Whitmore? Miss Hoffman, Grace corrected calmly. Ms. Hoffman, you claim my client abused you for 4 years, yet you stayed. You married him. You got pregnant by him. You lived in a beautiful home he provided. Used credit cards he paid for. Attended events as his wife. Is that correct? Yes.
Was 3 years.
So despite this alleged abuse, you continued accepting his financial support, his gifts, his affection. I stayed because he made me believe I was worthless without him. because he controlled all the money, because he isolated me from friends and family, because leaving felt more dangerous than staying. But you eventually left, after he slapped you once in public. Why then? Why not after the previous alleged incidents? Grace took a breath. Every woman in the courtroom leaned forward. Because it was public. Because witnesses saw it. Because my father was there. Because I couldn't pretend anymore. Because... Her voice strengthened. Because I was about to become a mother, and I couldn't let my daughter grow up watching me accept abuse and thinking that was normal. So you're saying one slap was worse than years of alleged abuse? I'm saying one public slap made it impossible to hide anymore, made it impossible for anyone to deny what was happening, including me. The lawyer circled. Predatory. Ms. Hoffman, isn't it true you stand to gain financially from these proceedings? Spousal support, child support, division of assets. I stand to gain safety, Grace replied evenly. Money is secondary to not being afraid in my own home. Isn't it true your father orchestrated your husband's arrest to advance his FBI investigation? My father investigated a criminal who happened to be my husband. Those facts intersected, but they're separate. Derek committed crimes. I was abused. Both things are true independent of each other. You've alleged abuse. Yet you stayed 4 years. If it was so terrible, why didn't you leave sooner? Grace locked eyes with the lawyer, with Derek, with the jury. I stayed because he told me I was worthless, because he controlled the money, because he isolated me from everyone who cared about me, because he made me believe I deserved it, because I was afraid, because leaving seemed impossible. Her voice rose. But I stopped staying. That's what matters. I found the strength to leave, to protect my daughter, to save both of us. Why I stayed is less important than why I finally left. The courtroom went silent. The lawyer had no response. No further questions. Brooke stood for redirect. Grace, I have one final question. What do you want people to understand about domestic violence? Grace looked directly at the jury, spoke from her heart. It doesn't start with a slap. It starts with charm, with gifts, with attention that feels like love. Then come small criticisms, isolation disguised as devotion, control disguised as protection. By the time the actual violence starts, you're so beaten down emotionally that you can barely recognize yourself. She paused. Let the words sink in. The hardest part isn't the abuse itself. It's admitting I knew. Deep down, some part of me always knew something was wrong, but knowing and accepting are different things. It took becoming a mother to accept that I deserved better, that she, Grace touched her belly, deserves better. Several jurors were crying. Grace saw recognition in their faces. People who'd been there, or knew someone who had, or finally understood why victims stay. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes, came back with a verdict. Guilty on all counts: assault and battery, criminal threats, violation of protective orders. Derek received 5 years state prison to be served consecutively after his federal sentence, meaning he'd serve 18 years federal, then 5 years state, 23 years total. Grace would be 52 years old when Derek was eligible for release. Her daughter would be 23, an adult, safe, far beyond his reach. The restraining order was made permanent. Derek's parental rights were legally restricted. He could petition for supervised visitation after release, but family court would have final say. Given his federal conviction and assault conviction, chances were slim. Grace's daughter would likely never know her father as anything except a cautionary tale. Outside the courthouse, press swarmed. Grace gave one statement, Brooke beside her. Tom and Claire flanking her, Marcus providing security. Grace read from prepared notes. I'm not a hero. I'm a survivor. There's a difference. Heroes choose danger. Survivors simply refuse to die. If my story helps one woman recognize the signs earlier than I did, if it helps one woman leave before it escalates, if it helps one woman believe she deserves better, then every moment of this trial was worth it. She didn't take questions, just walked to her father's car, hand on her belly, and left. That night, Grace sat in her new apartment, boxes still unpacked, furniture minimal, but hers, and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming weight of being done. The trials were over. Derek was sentenced. The divorce would finalize in a few months. Custody was secured. Her daughter was safe. They'd won. Grace had survived. 3 weeks later, Grace's water broke at 3 in the morning. She'd been having contractions all evening, but assumed they were Braxton Hicks. The doctor had said she had another week. Babies, apparently, make their own schedules. Grace called her mother first, then Brooke, then her father. They converged on her apartment within 20 minutes. Tom drove. Former Marine, crisis mode activated. Claire sat in back, coaching breathing. Brooke handled the hospital pre-registration from her phone. You're doing great, baby, Claire said calmly. Breathe through the contractions. That's it. In for 4, out for 4. Grace focused on breathing, on not panicking, on the fact that in a few hours she'd meet her daughter. The daughter she'd fought for, protected, survived for. Labor was long. 15 hours of contractions and breathing and pain and exhaustion, but also joy, anticipation, love so fierce it hurt. Her mother stayed the whole time, held her hand, wiped her forehead, murmured encouragement. You're so strong, baby. You're doing so well. She's almost here. Tom paced in the waiting room. Brooke kept him company, working on her laptop, handling legal paperwork, being present. At 6:43 in the evening, Grace's daughter was born. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy, perfect, safe. They placed her on Grace's chest, tiny, warm, crying lustily. Grace looked down at her daughter's face and felt something shift in her chest. Crack open, expand. Love, pure and fierce and terrifying and perfect. What's her name? The nurse asked gently. Grace had debated names for months, family names, strong names, pretty names, but holding her daughter, looking into eyes that saw her without judgment, without history, without fear, the answer was obvious. Hope, Grace whispered. Her name is Hope. Hope Elizabeth Hoffman. New life, new beginning, living proof that surviving terrible things doesn't break you. It just reshapes you into something stronger. Tom cried when he held his granddaughter. Big former Marine, decorated FBI agent, reduced to tears by a 7-pound baby. She's perfect, Gracie. She's absolutely perfect. She's safe, Grace said. That's all that matters. She's safe. The hospital wanted to keep them for 2 days of observation. Grace's blood pressure was still elevated. Hope needed monitoring. Grace didn't mind. Lying in the hospital bed with her daughter sleeping on her chest, Grace felt more at peace than she had in years. No Derek, no fear, no walking on eggshells. Just her and Hope, and the quiet beeping of monitors, and the knowledge that they'd made it. They'd survived. Brooke visited every day, brought coffee and snacks, and legal updates. Derek's lawyers filed a motion for visitation rights. After his release, supervised of course, the family court judge hasn't ruled yet, but given everything, the federal conviction, the assault conviction, the protective order, I'd be shocked if she grants it. And if she does, then Hope will be 18 by the time he's released. She can decide for herself if she wants contact. But Grace, realistically, he'll be in prison until she's an adult. She'll never remember him, never know him. He's just a name on a birth certificate. Grace looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the battle fought before her birth, the father she'd never know, the grandmother who'd tried to take her away. Good, Grace said simply. That's exactly what I want. 6 months passed. Grace and Hope moved into a rhythm, sleepless nights and constant feedings and dirty diapers and exhaustion, but also firsts. First smile, first laugh, first time Hope tracked Grace's face with her eyes. Grace returned to work part-time, 3 days a week, 4 hours a day. Harrison let her bring Hope to the gallery, set up a playpen in the office, told the staff that babies were welcome. The gallery thrived. Grace's eye for art hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had sharpened. She curated shows that got press coverage, brought in artists who sold out. Within months, Harrison was talking about opening a third location with Grace as regional director. The divorce finalized 5 months after Hope's birth. Grace got the house, sold it immediately, couldn't stand the memories, split the proceeds, divided assets. Derek has kept his business, what was left after the federal seizures. Grace got enough to buy her own small house, 2 bedrooms, backyard, good school district, safe neighborhood, her own house, her name on the deed. No one could take it from her. Child support was set at $3,000 per month. Spousal support would continue for 3 years, enough time for Grace to rebuild her career. After that, she'd be financially independent. Diane's custody petition was denied. The family court judge ruled that Diane had enabled her son's abuse, demonstrated hostility toward Grace, and showed no understanding of the dynamics of domestic violence. She was granted supervised visitation rights for 4 hours per month. She never used them. Apparently, seeing Hope meant acknowledging Derek's crimes. Easier to pretend Grace had fabricated everything. Grace didn't care. Hope didn't need a grandmother who blamed victims and protected abusers. Hope had Claire and Tom. She had Brooke, who became Aunt Brooke, showing up with toys and books and babysitting offers. She had Harrison from the gallery, who loved telling Hope stories about her mother's artistic eye. She had Jennifer, Derek's former assistant, who'd become a surprising friend. 2 women, bonded by surviving the same man. Hope had a family built on love, not biology, on choice, not obligation, on people who showed up and stayed, not people who demanded loyalty while offering nothing. On a Sunday morning, 6 months after Hope's birth, Grace sat in her new living room, coffee on the table, Hope in her lap, sunlight streaming through windows Grace controlled. Brooke visited with wine for her and juice for Grace, still nursing. They sat on the couch, 2 women who'd been through war together. Do you regret it? Brooke asked softly. The trial, the publicity, how hard it was. Grace considered. Honest answer? Parts of it, yes. I wish I'd left sooner, recognized the signs earlier, protected myself better, not gotten pregnant by him. She looked down at Hope. But I don't regret her, and I don't regret testifying. I don't regret fighting back. Good, because you helped more people than you know. Brooke pulled up her phone. The domestic violence nonprofit Jennifer started? They've gotten 1,000 inquiries since your trial. Women asking for help, leaving. Women saying your testimony gave them courage. The shelter capacity in this city has doubled. 3 new laws passed at the state level strengthening protective orders. You started something, Grace. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't mean to start anything. I just wanted to survive. That's how movements start. One woman saying, no more. One woman choosing to speak up instead of staying silent. One woman showing others it's possible. Grace's phone buzzed. Email from Jennifer. The nonprofit wanted Grace's input on programming, wanted her to speak at events if she was comfortable, share her story, help others. Then another email. From a woman Grace didn't know. I left last week. I kept thinking about what you said, that knowing and accepting are different things. I knew for years. Finally accepted I deserved better. Thank you. Then another, and another. Women she'd never met, lives she'd touched without trying. Grace hadn't set out to be anyone's inspiration, hadn't wanted to be a symbol or a spokesperson. She'd just wanted to protect her daughter and survive. But somehow, in saving herself, she'd given others permission to save themselves. Hope woke crying, hungry. Grace lifted her daughter, settled into the rocking chair her father had built, began to nurse. The apartment was quiet, safe, hers. Grace looked down at Hope's face. Perfect, innocent, unaware of the battle fought for her before she could understand. I want to tell you something, Grace whispered. Your father was not a good man. I won't lie to you about that. When you're old enough to ask, I'll tell you the truth, all of it. You deserve the truth. She paused, gathered words. But here's another truth. You saved me. Before you were born, you gave me a reason to fight, a reason to believe I deserved better. Everyone says I saved you from him, and I did. But you saved me from myself, from the woman I'd become, the one who'd forgotten her own worth. Hope's tiny hand gripped Grace's finger, trusting, dependent, perfect. You'll grow up knowing your worth isn't negotiable. That love doesn't come with conditions or fear or control, that you never have to earn safety by being perfect. That speaking up is brave, even when your voice shakes. That leaving something that hurts you is strength, not failure. Outside, dawn broke. Light spilled through windows, warm and golden and safe. Grace rocked her daughter and watched the sunrise, the first day of the rest of their lives. Not a fairy tale ending, better, a real one. Grace wasn't a princess rescued by a prince. She was a woman who'd rescued herself, who'd walked through fire to protect her child, who'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. She wasn't broken, she was forged. And Hope would grow up watching her mother be brave, be honest, be real, would learn that survival itself is heroism, that speaking truth is power, that women don't need saving. They need support, resources, and people who believe them. Hope would grow up different, better, safe, and that was everything. Grace kissed her daughter's forehead. Welcome to our new life, baby girl. It's going to be good. I promise. Hope yawned, stretched, settled back to sleep, safe, loved, free, and Grace finally believed she was too. Grace's story didn't end that day in the courthouse. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where she got to write her own ending. If Grace's journey touched your heart, hit that like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Stories that matter, stories that show us we're not alone in our struggles. Drop a comment below telling me what resonated with you most. Was it Grace's courage, her father's protection, the unexpected ally Jennifer? I read every single comment, and your thoughts mean everything. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be going through their own battle, someone who needs a reminder that leaving is possible, that speaking up is brave, and that they deserve better. And if you want more stories of courage, survival, and justice, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because every week, I bring you real stories about real people who refuse to stay silent. Remember, you're stronger than you think, braver than you know, and you're never, ever alone. I'll see you in the next story. Stay strong out there. This content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration to our audience.